How's it going guys, Chris here, and in this video we're going to be checking out the weird enemy types and creatures you'll be able to find in the disturbing world of Scorn. So Scorn delves into themes of body horror clearly inspired by the works of H.R. Giger, and aside from being a bit arty and mysterious, it's one hell of a messed up game. You'll journey through a bizarre dystopia land, often feeling like you're in the middle of a music video made by Tool, running into several different creatures along the way. But not all of these creatures are hostile. Right near the start, you'll come across a grabber claw to collect alien pods stuck against a wall. Basically a messed up version of that Toy Story scene in the arcade. Once you've managed to get one of the pods, sending it downwards to the area below, you'll notice that it's got a weird looking guy lodged inside it, with that weird looking guy appropriately being called a Moldman. Being fused with those hard cases, this leaves these creatures in a twisted, deformed state, rammed into those pods to be stored, and later used as biological raw material. Hence why there's a load of rail tracks around to transport the Moldmen to different parts of the facility. You'll need to use the defenseless creature to access a huge door, though how you choose to do that is totally up to you. If you're feeling nice, you can cart the Moldman around and plop it down into a gnarly looking saw machine. It might seem like they're sending the poor dude to his demise at first, but this machine actually does him a favour by grinding that pod away from his back. Not exactly a fun experience for the Moldman, but at least he's not glued to a rock anymore. Once he's eventually clambered out of the machine and manages to get up, you'll see what the creature really looks like. A feeble humanoid thing warped by the pod and left in a very crooked state, struggling to stand. Despite you ramming a saw into his back, the Moldman's just satisfied not being a barnacle anymore, choosing to follow you around while shambling about the place like a drunk man with a dodgy spine. Because the big door you need to get through requires two people to access it, you'll need to shove the creature's arm into a contraption to implant a key into its hand, which can then be used at the big door to grant you access to the area ahead, leaving the Moldman behind with his arm stuck in a lock. Sucks to be him. Though this is arguably a better fate than if you chose to put him in a different machine earlier on, as if we were to drag him over to another area while he's chilling out in the pod, you can deal with the whole scenario in a very different way. Sitting the creature down into a scoop machine, which then violently gouges the thing out from its casing, like a big blob of fleshy ice cream, lobbing the now dead creature into a dark pit, while letting you retrieve its ripped off arm to be used on the big door. What a pleasant way to go. One of the more popular enemy types you'll run into is a quadrupedal creature that roams around and scales walls, often blending into its biological environment. These are the workers, one of the several variants of crater creature, and probably the easiest type to tackle. Basically a bulky chunk of wandering meat, slowly plodding around, often minding its own business. The workers aren't exactly the most aggressive creatures in the game, though when they're awake and they're on the prowl, they will become hostile towards you if you're spotted, lumbering towards you while rearing up to blast out some nasty green goo from its chest, something you'll obviously want to avoid. These ranged attacks can hurt, but they're fairly easy to dodge, so long as you strafe into one side. Plus, the workers have also got to get within a reasonably short distance to be effective, which is why they tend to rush forwards, choosing to strike when they get a little closer up. Shooting them in the head a couple of times will be enough to put them out of action, though you'll often be best holding onto your ammo and resorting to the good old punch machine instead, taking more hits to actually down the beast, but saving your shots for tougher battles with other enemies, with it typically taking about 5 jabs with your melee weapon to kill a nearby worker. Workers' heads can also detach and transform into floaters, which can be seen drifting around the place like airborne jellyfish. These things don't choose to attack though, and can merely be found either gliding through the air or attached to high up walls, just chilling out with a bunch of buddies. Another type of crater creature is a smaller, more annoying variant known as the chicken, though not the type you'd expect to find in one of Colonel Sanders' buckets. These things are bird-like critters that awkwardly hop around the place, firing projectiles at you over longer distances, by spitting them out from their bulbous heads. Despite being puny creatures that look a bit daft, these chickens are feisty little buggers that shouldn't be underestimated, compensating for their lack of size with lots of aggression, also being surprisingly accurate too, with their attacks being trickier to dodge than the workers, able to predict which way you're moving and aim their fast moving shots accordingly, making them a real pest in situations with multiple enemies, and just a real pest in general. They also prefer to hang back and keep a bit of distance too, which is probably a wise thing for them to do, being really weak creatures that can be taken down in just a couple of hits. Whether you choose to play them at their own game and fire shots at their noggin, or just rush in and smack them around with that melee tool instead, with the chicken being vulnerable to pretty much any kind of attack. One of the more passive enemy types comes in the form of a drone creature that floats around, spraying a misty vapour out from a tube-like mouth. Although these things aren't going to chase you around and attack you head on like some of the other creatures, getting caught out in those fog clouds can inflict tons of damage, and with the drones blowing out plumes of it along pathways you'll need to pass through, This acts as an area denial tool, forcing you to deal with the drones before pushing on forwards. Thankfully, this is pretty easy to do, as all you need to do is whip out your melee weapon, sneak up behind the creature, and then give it a smack while avoiding that icy spray, popping its bubble head, causing it to drop to the floor. You've just got to move around slowly while the drones are around contaminating the area, and just take them out one by one while they're unaware, allowing you to reach to the next area safe and sound. So far we've established that quite a few of the creatures in Scornland like to shoot stuff at you over distance, and we can add another one to the list now, with the game also featuring projectile firing worms that flop down from the ceiling looking a little bit like a giant you-know-what. These alien schlong monsters are stationary enemies fixed to surfaces, and they'll often act like traps, which droop down along pathways that you need to venture through, usually needing to be dealt with in order to pass through in one piece. Although you can whack them around with a melee tool in close range, it's generally a better, much safer idea to get the gun out and return fire at them over distance, as one shot is all it's going to take to rip the monster apart, also enough to cause every bloke watching to wince a little bit. These worms do like to wriggle around, making them a tad tricky to hit, though aiming higher up near the body of the creature should at least make this easier to do. Just try not to get too close or it's going to start spitting acid at you, forcing you to strafe around to dodge its attacks. One of the meanest creatures you'll encounter is essentially another walking chunk of meat, but a much heftier one than the worker, acting more like a bull which rushes you in close range. These brute creatures stand taller than the others, also packing much more of a punch if they hit you, making them a very dangerous monster to run into, with them resorting to ramming attacks, rather than firing stuff over distance like most of the other things in the game. They're not exactly lightning fast, so you can just simply sidestep to avoid those charges, though a lot of Scorn's environments don't really give you very much room to manoeuvre around, and if you get caught by a brute in a narrow corridor, you're going to have to act fast to avoid getting flattened. Along with dealing a lot of damage, they're also more resistant to your weapons too, so it can take quite a few pistol shots or melee hits to eventually bring them down, and by that time they might have already made a nasty dent in your health bar if you're not careful. It's probably best saving ammo for your heavier shotgun style weapon, with that being able to punch through their thick hide a lot easier. Though they're not exactly the smartest things in the world, so it can sometimes be better to just run away to save on ammo, with them giving up the chase if you get some good distance from them. By far the largest, and probably one of the creepiest monsters you'll find in Scorn, is the Crater Queen. Basically a ginormous jelly monster which just so happens to be sat on the elevator that you need to access. Looking a bit like a melted slug that's fell into a salt jar, the Crater Queen doesn't directly attack you, choosing to just sit around while eerily watching you as you move around the area. Because of its fleshy body structure that hangs down engulfing the elevator, this puts the both of you in a bit of an awkward spot, as it's not only in your way by covering the walkways, but those walkways are also extendable, tearing right the way through the creature's flesh draping over them, causing it intense pain whenever they're lowered. We can assume this is the source of the other crater creatures found in the game, basically being the mother, as we can see a bunch of smaller ones trying to wriggle their way out of the queen's back in a similar way to botfly larvae. If you don't know what a botfly is, probably best not googling it if you're having your dinner. With the queen being completely defenseless, it relies on its spawn to do the work for it, with them reacting to the queen wailing out in pain every time you extend a walkway which rips through the queen's body. You've got to activate 3 of these walkways in total, and then reach the elevator in the middle to play around with a little puzzle, which switches the elevator on, lifting up both you and the monster perched above it, ripping the poor queen apart in the process, only to then crush it into the ceiling as it reaches the top, which we can then go on to see, squished by the elevator, when looking out the window of the exit tunnel, just casually hanging around looking a bit worse for wear. Probably shouldn't have been sat on the elevator then like a bloody idiot. Towards the latter end of your journey, you'll come across a few weird pink eggs containing some kind of evil looking fetus creature, or some sort of mechanised organism designed only for killing. Something like that. These creepy things are actually called the homunculi, humanoid creatures with tiny limbs and abnormally massive heads, created inside containers where they essentially act like living batteries for other machinery. One of the machines powered by these creatures turns out to be a big cyborg made out of humanoid limbs and mechanical parts. And just out of curiosity, you decide to plop the little leg dude into a cyborg to see what happens. Turns out that this guy's not in a very constructive mood and doesn't really feel like doing anything, so you're better off discarding this one and using it for something else, killing the thing with your melee weapon and then carrying it off elsewhere. Lo and behold, there's another machine nearby you can shove the creature in, only this one's not designed to be powered by the creature, it's one designed to crush the crap out of it. Think about a juicing press, but one that's totally f***ed up. This is specifically used to turn the homunculi creatures into mushy pulp, extracting blood and tissue from their spent carcasses, which can then be filled up in a tube to be used elsewhere. Pretty gross. You'll need to fill this vial a few times, so back to the homunculi room to grab another one. The next creature you stick into a cyborg turns out to be much more responsive, waking up from its slumber, gaining full control of its newly acquired mech suit. It'll shut the hatch and rise to its feet, instantly becoming hostile towards you, lunging forwards with its mechanical arm in close range, while using a grenade launcher to fling explosives at you over distance. You'll need to evade the cyborg attacks using the structures around the room for cover, as it clambers around firing volleys of bombs your way, waiting for it to reload so you can rush around its sides to shoot some exposed weak spots. Do this a few times and it'll cause the cyborg to malfunction, dropping to the floor, letting you rip off its grenade launcher. That's what you'd like to do, but then our pretty pissed off Homunculi stops that from happening, activating the second wave of the fight, where it becomes faster and more relentless. Now you've got to lure the cyborg into punching you up close, which can sometimes temporarily open that protective cage at the front, making the creature inside very vulnerable to getting blasted by your guns. Best whipping out your heavy weapon and doing just that whenever you've got a good opportunity. Hit the creature a few times and the cyborg will finally slump to its knees and die for good, letting you pull off a grenade launcher module to be added to your arsenal. Don't forget to pick up the dead Homunculi creature too, as it's time to turn that little bugger into soup. Give the creature a good squish in that juicer and get a bit of revenge for all the trouble it's caused you, filling up your vial again in the process. 2 down, 1 to go. You've got to do this process once more, so let's stick another creature into yet another cyborg, because nothing bad's going to happen if we do that, of course. Surprise surprise, the cyborg gets up and the creature piloting it happens to be just as nasty as the last one, but at least this time you've got a grenade launcher, allowing you to fight fire with fire. All you've got to do now is wait for the cyborg to reload, causing a gate to open on its back where it'll retrieve ammo. Lob an aid into this gate, and then sit back and watch the fireworks, blasting the cyborg into pieces while killing the Homunculi creature inside. Nice and easy. Let's head back to the good old squisher one more time to create some more of that nasty gore juice. And now you'll be able to advance further through the story, being able to put all that creature blood to some use. You might be wondering why we had to collect a load of blood and guts, but it turns out that those vials are actually needed to form some new humanoid creatures, which are basically made by pumping all that gory liquid into human-shaped molds, forming a living shell thing that can be controlled telepathically. There's 2 of these shell creatures that you'll gain control over, and you'll need to use them both to advance through the area, but only after being surgically butchered by a weird steampunk robot and just casually having the top of your head sliced off by it, which then goes on to connect you to a network of organic wires strung all over the ceiling, basically acting like some sort of hive mind. Yep, this game definitely gets stranger by the minute. You'll reawaken as one of the shells, essentially sending your consciousness to it through the network, thus giving you control of its movements while abandoning your old body, which at this point of the game is in a bit of a rough state, needing to be carried by one of the shells while the other assists by opening doors. So although there's been quite a few different enemy types so far, the main antagonist of Scorn is actually a Parasite creature, which you'll first encounter fairly early on in the game, most likely being a heavily mutated version of the first character you play as during Act 1. The Parasite can be found lurking in the shadows around abandoned ruins, sort of taunting you as you explore, eerily slinking along the walls and ceiling like a xenomorph stalking its prey. It's a pretty agile creature, being able to maneuver around the environment quickly, and being such a slippery thing, it'll ambush you when you're caught off guard, wrapping you up with a fleshy tendril, while clambering around onto your back and grabbing a hold, clinging onto you tightly by using a bunch of elongated ribs and a pair of arms with dagger-like claws. It's going to be one hell of a nasty piggyback ride from this point on. This Parasite is pretty much latched onto you for the rest of your journey, constantly wearing you down with its arms, clawing away at your stomach to inflict damage and immense pain, which happens quite a lot over the course of the story. Though it's key to know that without the Parasite, you'd be completely defenseless, with its tail being merged with our original guy's tool handle, giving you access to his weapons and equipment, in a way providing a service, but at a cost of continuously leeching from you, which pretty much describes modern gaming. The longer the Parasite's attached, the more pain you'll have to endure, with the creature slowly ripping your guts out and attempting to merge with you by mutating your body, which by the end is practically overcome by the Parasite's infection. You desperately need to get this thing off your back before it completely destroys your body, and the only way you can do that is by crawling onto a special machine and extracting it using a big claw. Here we'll get a good close-up of the creature, able to see the remnants of the original deformed dude, and by hovering that claw over the Parasite, you'll go on to give it a taste of its own medicine by latching onto the thing, ripping it away from your back, and freeing you from its torment, letting you escape despite having a bunch of fatal wounds, while the Parasite breaks free from the machine and slinks off back into the shadows. Just when you thought you'd finally got rid of the bloody thing, it decides to pop up again right at the very end, while one of those shells is carrying your almost dead body towards a heavenly void. The Parasite latches back on, attempts to merge with you, and basically finishes the job it set out to achieve, with you unfortunately being the host once again, snatching away any kind of hope you had for getting through this nightmare in one piece, slowly consuming you over time, eventually becoming a freakish mound of flesh and bone, forever grounded to one spot and forever grounded to the parasite that foiled your plan, doomed to spend eternity as an ugly meat plant. How lovely. So if that wasn't wild enough for you, be sure to check out my channel for loads of other videos featuring weird and wacky enemies in other games. That's pretty much the end of this guide though, but if you enjoyed it, please give us a thumbs up on your way out, and make sure you subscribe if you want to stay updated with new guides just like this coming up in the future. Thanks for watching folks, have a good day, and I'll be seeing you in that next one.